I've been thinking a lot about the Division 2, which is not something one usually has to think about. It's an open world looter shooter in which you click on heads and pass the time with friends. It is holistically unremarkable in every conceivable way. Well, except one, but we'll get there. That's like the whole point of the video. It's not a bad game, it's a Ubisoft game. It feels like it was made by 6 different committees across 4 distant cities and at least 3 continents. Which it was, but is also a game in which the shooting feels satisfying, the abilities are adorable, and the numbers continually go up. I mean, it's also a game with one of the most underwhelming upgrade paths I can remember, but hey, it's Ubisoft. What do you want? No, the thing I've been obsessing over isn't the gameplay, it's the city. As both a federal employee and a lifelong resident of the region, I know DC pretty well, and I've used footage of the game in past videos to show the agencies I've worked for, even specific buildings and offices I worked in. The Division 2's recreation of DC is so accurate, has captured so many minute details, that I can navigate the map exclusively through the placement of coffee shops. Though that says maybe more about me than the game, and I don't even drink coffee. The Division 2's recreation of DC has to be the best city there's ever been in a video game. Sure, the streets are in the right place and they've got all the recognizable landmarks, but even the architectural details are right. Things no one else would ever notice, like parking garage entrances, alleyways, even the loading docks are exactly where they should be. Although, for the record, the door is actually here, not here. I've spent enough time down there doing shred runs to know it's seared into my memory. But this mediocre, somehow perfect game holds a terrifying secret. For there is one thing in this game that is very, very wrong, threatening to unravel the very fabric of reality this game is built upon. A mystery so deep, we'll have to fight through politics and history to solve it, and confront the mysteries of my own dark past. I'm Michael Aguero. Let's talk about the Division 2 and one very important building. Detailed cities in video games are nothing new. GTA probably broke the mold on that one. But we've had Rapture, Gotham, Saint Denis, all fictional, sure, but made to feel alive through careful decisions regarding layout, artwork, architectural details, and the endless refuse of the lives lived by virtual people. We've also seen real cities, New York, Lego New York, and everything from Florence and London to Boston and Paris, thanks to Ubisoft's Assassin's Creed. All of those video game cities did wonders in terms of capturing their geographic layout and the details of landmarks and historical buildings. But the vagaries of history allowed them to condense and consolidate the game world, giving an illusion of reality rather than replicate the scale of the real thing. The Division 2 isn't even the first to try and recreate DC. Bethesda, which is located just a few stops down the Red Line, attempted to recreate the National Capital Region for Fallout 3. But that franchise's unique history allowed them to take significant liberties with the city's layout, buildings, and accessibility of certain areas. They could lock off much of the National Mall through rubble and super mutants and deny us access to many of the buildings in the guise that it's all gone, swept away by nuclear winter. For the Division 2, Ubisoft had to not only capture a city in the present day, they had to do it from the other side of the planet, to capture a city in which people still lived, walked, and worked, who would know if the details were wrong. To not just recreate the feel of the thing, but the memory of people who still walk those streets. And it's all here. There's the aforementioned coffee shops, this one courtyard that makes up like 90% of the shots in the opening credits to House of Cards. The sculpture garden and the fountain are both here, though the sculptures are not, probably a copyright issue on that one. Though they do have the cafeteria and even this specific table, which I'm pretty sure I've eaten at. It may not be accurate to the pixel, the individual proportions might be a bit off, but it is perfect to the memory, to how we picture a place in our mind's eye instead of our camera. Some of these inaccuracies are more severe than others, but can be explained away because this is a video game, the gameplay has to come first. I think the best example, and certainly the most obvious, is Smithsonian Station. One of the metro entrances is in the right place, this one right here. I should know, I used to exit here every day for like 2 years on my way to work. No, the problem is the other one. See, in the video game, these stations run east to west, alongside the mall, heading towards the Washington Monument. But this other station doesn't actually exist. It's pure fiction made up for the video game. You might think it weird for a team to painstakingly capture every Starbucks and then screw up the metro placement, but it's done in the service of gameplay. First, it gets them this giant hole in the ground to break up the wide open expanse of the National Mall, and it gives them this cool visual for a control point of the cracked open metro looking up to an unobstructed sky. And second, it's because the real metro would screw up their layout. Division 2 has these extraction zones, which are sealed off from the rest of the game world. They're basically a special mode or raid in which a team goes in to get better gear because, again, looter shooter. This is a problem because the real Smithsonian Station runs not west to east, but north to south, and exists almost exactly here next to this giant wall. This is also why the pedestrian bridges are missing. See, these two buildings make up the headquarters to the United States Department of Agriculture, or USDA. The one on the right is the Witten building, and the one on the left is the South building because I'm facing west, and that's how maps work. In the real world, these bridges are connected by 2 stone archways that are actually sealed bridges. There's also a tunnel, but you can't see it because it's underground like tunnels tend to be. All 3 of these allow the workers to get back and forth between the 2 buildings without having to go outside where all the peasants live. You may wonder how I know so much about these specific buildings with their specific names and specific layouts, but that's because I used to work here. This is the actual window to my actual office back when I worked for Undersecretary Northey. Speaking of which, those photos I've shown of us in the clock tower, yeah, that's this clock tower in the Forest Service building. Though it looks worse for wear in this timeline, wouldn't want to be up there now. And it's this building, the Witten building, and this timeline, which brings us back to the deep dark secret of why we're here today. Because this building is wrong. It is very wrong in a very interesting way. But in order to understand why, we need to talk a little history. So republics have this problem in which they aren't proactive, they're reactive. Your congressmen, your senators, they don't actually care about fixing a problem until you complain about it, until there's a crisis. They're reacting to a problem, not preventing the problem from happening. If you look at the United States and their history, you'd think a Department of Agriculture would be pretty high on the list of departments to create, us being the breadbasket of the world and all. We didn't just defeat the British through crossing frozen rivers on Christmas. We did it thanks to agriculture money from Virginia tobacco and Carolina cotton. None of which was helped by USDA because it didn't exist for a long, long time. In 1830, 50-some years after we became a nation, we finally get around to thinking about agriculture not because of money, but because of seeds. Patent and Trademark, where I also used to work and was just called Patents back then, was in office under the State Department, and not Commerce where it currently is, because the Department of Commerce didn't exist yet. Things have to exist for you to put things inside them. Where were we? Right, so Patents wants to make better seeds. I promise this is leading somewhere. And ask Congress to make an agricultural division within the Patents Office which again is in the State Department. And patents then eventually gets transferred to the Department of Interior, which is like the junk drawer of federal departments, or at least it was until the creation of Homeland Security. So then Abraham Lincoln, the best president, comes along and establishes the actual Department of Agriculture in 1862 during this little thing called the Civil War, almost 100 years after a nation of farmers became a nation. It was staffed by, and I'm not kidding, 8 employees and was led by Isaac Newton. No, not that Isaac Newton. This Isaac Newton. Isn't history fun? Thanks to Lincoln, they're a big fancy department and they need a big fancy building. I bet some of you are starting to wonder if I made a video about a Ubisoft game to trick you into learning the history of this agency I used to work for. And the answer is yes, but also this does tie back into the game. Stick with me. So the building finally begins construction in 1862 and is finally occupied in 1868. But it's not actually this building, it's another building, which judging by the pictures was very pretty, and it was located approximately here-ish. This older building was incompatible with this thing called the Macmillan Plan. The Macmillan Plan is the reason the mall is shaped this way and why conspiracy theorists are obsessed with it for some reason. It was made in 1902 by the Senate Park Commission, back when the Senate was capable of doing, well, anything. I'd go into more detail, but we're already like 4 tangents deep. Point being, they need a new building. This building, the Witten building, the building that is wrong in the Division 2, the video game we're actually talking about. For the record, I first heard this story 6 years and 1 plague ago from Shelby Calloway, who was the historian at NRCS. He used to do these tours of the building's history that were so fun, I went on it twice. They really should make it open to the public. I didn't know how much of this story was actually true, but Shelby has a PhD and I don't, so I was happy to take his word for it. But as we're about to see, it is very much true, and I now have the receipts to prove it. All the way back in March of 1901, Secretary Wilson asked Congress for a new building. Planning begins, and the projected cost ends up being around $2.5 million. That was a bigger bill than Congress was willing to swallow, and ultimately only $1.5 million was authorized in February 1903. An architecture firm by the name of Rankin, Kellogg, and Crane are brought in to design the building in 1904 after Teddy Roosevelt, yes, that Teddy Roosevelt, what other ones are there, has to intervene about a minor land dispute. The presidents in my time can't do anything but bomb people and ruin the economy, but back in those days, they got stuff done. I mean, who are we kidding? Teddy Roosevelt absolutely would have bombed people from airplanes had he been able. Though he did break up the trust and did make the Department of Commerce, so it all tied together. The new building, the Witten building, stay on target, is now all ready to go except for one little problem. Money. See, the building was designed with this U shape in mind, with a big bit in the middle, and then 2 wings on either side, because that's how wings work. But $1.5 million was not enough for the whole thing. Congress, being Congress, says, hey, we'll just build the center bit, and then we'll come back like a decade later and build the rest. And Secretary Wilson is like, yeah, right, I've seen Congress. I know how they work, or rather don't. He knows he's never getting the rest of the money or the rest of his building, and he's none too happy about it. So he gets rather clever. Instead of building the center bit, he's going to build the outside wings first. This will leave a big stupid hole in the middle of the building, being an eyesore right on the National Mall, in front of God and everybody. In effect, he's going to shame Congress into giving him the rest of the money so his building doesn't look like a half-completed mess. It's a brilliant bit of politics. Unfortunately for Wilson, it didn't work. The wings get built in 1907-ish, and people start moving in, and things just kind of stagnate. Unfortunately for USDA, the department just kept getting bigger, even as its buildings did not. The department goes from 1,000 employees in 1903 when the building is planned, to nearly 5,000 employees by 1926, and there's still no center block in sight. or on-site, as the case may be. That joke probably worked better in print. This led to USDA employees being scattered all across the city, and Congress decides maybe they ought to do something about that problem, because again, they can only be reactive, not proactive. Why just build the damn thing when you can wait for a crisis? This is part of a larger effort to build a lot of things in DC, but the USDA building gets $400,000 to go finish their center bit. Rankin and Kellogg, a crane left to form his own band, are brought back and revive their old designs, with one very notable change. The only change that matters. The one so important, I made a whole video about it. So if you've played The Division 2, the video game we're actually talking about, you'll know the inside of these buildings takes certain liberties. This is done for a whole bunch of reasons, including copyright, gameplay, and security. After all, the government probably doesn't want floor plan accurate renditions of government buildings for a game in which people run around with semi-automatic weapons, shooting other people, given our recent history of coups. And it would be unfair to expect the developers to get everything down to the wallpaper right. I mean, they have a game to make, not a digital museum to construct. The same is true of the Witten building. The walls don't really look like this, the layout has some minor changes. But the important thing, the part I find so damn fascinating, is this courtyard. This one right here, because in real life, it doesn't exist. In real life, it looks like this. Unfortunately, this is the only picture I managed to take of the courtyard, even though I worked in this building every day for 2 years. But hey, I'm glad I did, because otherwise, how would I make this video? To recap, in the real world, big domed plaza with a fountain and a stage and everything. An internal courtyard sealed off from the outside world. But in the video game, we have this open courtyard with plants and stuff. They even managed to keep the fountain. I wonder why that is. Well, it's because of Rankin and Kellogg. This was the one change they made. In the original 1903-04 plans, this building has an open courtyard with greenery and the like. It's not until Rankin and Kellogg are brought back in 1926 that this changes. Instead, they turn it into an interior courtyard, reducing construction costs and adding to available workspace. And the first time I played this game, this absolutely floored me. I'd gotten it for free on like PS Plus or something, and was just hoping to poke around this city I worked in. Then I see a mission in the actual building that I work at. I mean, how often does that happen? And go to check it out. I'd already been on Shelby's tour, I already knew the whole history of the place, and then bam, courtyard. It's a really strange choice for the developers to make. I mean, how would you even know about this? Like, you need a PhD Shelby Calloway level background to know this stuff exists. How deep does this mystery actually go? Is there some member on Division 2's staff that is a secret agricultural buff? Did they go too deep down a Macmillan Plan rabbit hole while working on Assassin's Creed and unknowingly create a conspiracy that I am only now unraveling? No, I think the actual culprit is more sinister, more evil. I think the real fault is Google. See, in real life, this building looks like this, which you can see from the street view. There's my old office again. And it's a fairly squat government building. But on Google Maps, it looks like this monstrosity. I'm guessing the angle of the satellite taking the picture is what distorts the image. And from up here, you can't actually see the plaza. You can only see the windows, the supposed courtyard. And I mean, you could just Google the actual courtyard, but you kind of have to know it's there in order to do that. And because of the angle that this satellite took, this distorted image, you can't actually see the plaza from this height. You can only see windows. So yeah, Division 2 devs, I know your secret. You built this entire game off some Google shit, didn't you? Caught you red-handed. Or should I say USDA-handed? In video games, we get used to these big swings in our alternate history. Assassin's Creed having a shadow war between Templars and Assassins going back thousands of years. Fallout involving an entirely different Cold War that resulted in the nuclear destruction of the world and the capitalistic dominance of a particular brand of soda. And sure, this is just an accident of game design, of artists working all around the world under tight deadlines and impossible crunch to make a mediocre shooter greenlit by a failing company to push loot boxes on children and drain us all of our money like insatiable leeches. But I like to think somewhere deep in the lore of The Division 2 that this was intentional. That in some other timeline, Crane never left the band and convinced Kellogg and Rankin to keep the courtyard. Or Teddy Roosevelt died in the assassination. Yes, I know that was after he was president, I don't care. And Congress was so moved, they gave USDA all the funding they needed. I mean, I guess it's theoretically Tom Clancy's world, though I don't see Dingo Chavez and John Clark running around anywhere. So something had to cause their timeline to diverge from ours, and I like to think this is one small ripple of that. One tiny distortion caused by the flapping of the butterfly's wings. This is admittedly just some small cool thing that no one would ever notice. Hell, I only did because I happened to have worked there, been on Shelby's tour, and played this game, which is a pretty unique confluence of events. It's an intersection of history and government and all these things I like to think about, but it's also the life I lived. Even though I grew up in this area, I never really went into DC outside of the occasional field trip. It may be the most powerful city in the world, a new Rome for a dying age, but to me it was just this place of traffic and metro stations that still don't have bathrooms. It wasn't until I went to work for the government that I actually spent real time here, walking the streets, going to restaurants, learning the little back alley shortcuts and the people who occupy them. We're so used to video game cities with their NPC, pantomime, canned animations, giving us a mirage simulation of life rather than the real thing. These video game cities don't have people, they have animatronics, missing the color, personality, and struggle that makes a city feel real and stick in the memory. The big irony here is that Division 2's DC is equally dead, killed by a plague from which it couldn't recover. More animals traverse the streets than people, the traffic caused by abandoned cars, and mobs of randomly generated enemies. When walking through this fake version of a real place, I saw the buildings and the streets and the landmarks, sure, but I also saw the ghosts. The people I ate lunch with and the places I went, some of which are no longer there, killed by COVID and all too real plague. I remember standing in this alleyway once a month for our shred runs. I remember the guard who used to stand at the entrance to the parking garage and the storage room where I found all those Iran-Contra files. I remember this very specific nook where a homeless guy used to sleep and occasionally piss on the side of a Starbucks, and this street corner where this guy used to sell newspapers, and every time a cold wind blew, and I know I won't be able to do this justice, would go, "Chile Willy." And that real city, mimicked by the fake one, is gone too. Partially from plague, and partially because I don't work there anymore. I don't walk those streets, I don't know those floors. I'll soon be saying goodbye to government work for a while due to a variety of personal and professional reasons. It's real rough out there these days. But a part of me is deeply nostalgic for that period in my life, even if I spent those years struggling to get ahead and it only lasted a brief while. I am both incredibly grateful and wonderfully surprised that I am able to go back and walk those streets anytime I want. Not by getting on the metro and slogging into the city, but by playing a video game. As the city changes, buildings get torn down and remodeled, this one will still be here, at least until Ubisoft shuts down the servers in search of the next big profitable thing. I hope that as people take pictures and videos of the real city, others put in the work to make an offline version of this one so we can all go visit it someday. I'm Michael Aguero. Thanks for watching. If you want to support the channel, consider picking up one of my mini books. There's Rebuilding the Executive, which discusses all of the government agencies I talked about today. Or Thrice Dead Witch, which will soon be getting an updated cover. So if you want an original version, now's the time to pick up a copy for your collection. And finally, I plan to be uploading more regularly over the next year, so I've revived the Patreon. I can't promise exactly how consistent my output is going to be, but the plan is to do smaller videos maybe once a month while I work on the bigger retrospectives in the background. We'll see how that goes. As always, thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Nope, that all up. Too many words.